Welcome to Betrayal Narratives. Today's story dives into the kind of truth that hides in plain sight truth, wrapped in family smiles, polite dinners, and the quiet assumptions we inherit without ever agreeing to them. It begins in a courtroom, but the story itself started long before that. In the private ruins of a family that never knew how to see me until it was far too late. The courtroom felt colder than it should have. Not the kind of cold that comes from air conditioning, but the sort that settles into your ribs, the kind that carries weight. Silence hung everywhere, thick, stretched, expectant. You could hear every breath, every shift of fabric. And in that silence sat my stepbrother, Mark Jensen, the perpetual golden boy of a household that had never found a use for me other than as a shadow. He sat slouched in his chair, elbows wide, wearing the smirk he used whenever he thought he'd already won. It was the same smirk that worked on my mother, the same one that charmed my stepfather, and apparently the same one he thought would fool a judge presiding over a federal case. He kept glancing at me like this was a petty argument blown out of proportion, as if we were here because I'd overreacted or misunderstood something harmless. Then the judge cleared his throat and the illusion cracked. He was an older man with a tired face, creases around his eyes, silver hair cropped close. The look of someone who had read thousands of lies and still bothered to search for the truth buried somewhere beneath them. He lifted the bound report in front of him, the kind that bore official emblems and required more signatures than a peace treaty. "Mr. Jensen," he said, voice carrying the kind of stillness that silences a room without ever rising. "This report from the Diplomatic Security Service," he tapped the thick folder with 2 fingers, "presents a very different narrative than the one UVA submitted." Mark's smirk twitched, but held, barely. The judge shifted his attention only slightly, just enough for his next sentence to strike with precision. "It states that your stepsister, Ms. Raina Cole, is not." He paused, eyes lowering as he read a dramatic data entry clerk. As you repeatedly suggested, you could feel the temperature drop. Even the air got heavier. A few people in the audience leaned forward. The judge leaned closer to his microphone, voice sharpening. "It identifies her as a senior threat analyst with level 4 clearance." Mark blinked once. Twice, the smirk cracked like glass under pressure. And at approximately 205 hours, the judge continued. "She activated a duress protocol, typically reserved for higher-risk diplomatic incidents. A protocol," he added, raising his eyes directly to Mark, "that I myself have only encountered in federal manuals, not in a domestic assault case." The look on my stepbrother's face shifted from confidence to confusion to the slow, dawning horror of someone realizing he had stumbled into an arena he didn't understand. For the first time in my life, I felt something close to calm settle inside me. Cold, clean, precise. Because this room spoke a language my family had never cared to learn. The language of consequences. To understand how we ended up here, you'd have to go back to weeks back to a night where the only things louder than their laughter were my own heartbeat. And the sound of something inside me finally breaking. It was just after 2 in the morning. The kind of hour where the world outside is quiet, but the wrong households stay awake, clinging to chaos because they don't know how to function without it. Mark was drunk again. Not the silly, stumbling drunk some people become, but the angry, unpredictable kind. His voice bounced off the kitchen walls, growing louder with every pointless accusation he hurled at me. That's something about me moving his tools, about me disrespecting him, about me breathing wrong. It changed every 5 minutes. I tried to calm him, tried to keep my voice steady, tried to keep us from waking the neighbors again, tried to keep the situation from spiraling the way it always did. And from the living room, I heard it. Laughter. Not nervous laughter, not startled, comfortable laughter. Like they were watching a sitcom. My mother, Sandra, polished, poised, endlessly invested in maintaining the image of the perfect blended family, and my stepfather, Gary, who liked to imagine himself the captain of a ship that everyone else knew was sinking. Neither of them moved. Neither of them cared. If anything, they were entertained. "Oh, let 'em be, Raina," my mother called out. her voice carrying that dismissive amusement she used when she didn't want to deal with anything inconvenient. "You always get 'em worked up. Honestly, you're so dramatic." The words slipped into the kitchen like a slap, familiar and sharp. Dramatic. She used that word for everything she didn't want to recognize. But before I could respond, before I could explain that I wasn't doing anything but trying to keep her son from breaking something, Mark lunged. It happened fast, the way dangerous things usually do. He grabbed a screwdriver from the open toolbox on the counter. His movements were sloppy, but fueled by something bitter and reckless. The pain in my shoulder came a split second later, hot, piercing, blinding. My breath hitched. I stumbled against the counter, one hand pressing instinctively against the wound, feeling warm, slick blood seeping between my fingers. And from the living room, laughter. Again, not the startled kind, not the horrified kind. They thought we were having another one of our little arguments. They had no idea because they never asked, never looked, never cared to see that this time something had gone horribly wrong. My vision tunneled. My legs went weak. Everything felt distant, like I was underwater. But my mind somehow remained painfully clear. I pulled out my phone with shaky hands. My fingers stuttered across the screen. I opened a contact that didn't have a name, just a number. I typed 3 letters, SOS. It wasn't a plea to a friend. It was a protocol, a signal. A line of defense built years before my family decided my achievements were hobbies, and my work was nothing more than paperwork. And then the world dimmed. The last thing I heard was Mark swearing, my mother sighing, and my stepfather mumbling something about kids these days. They thought I fainted. They thought I was being dramatic. They thought I had texted someone to complain. They had no idea they had just stepped into the line of sight of a system designed to protect federal assets in hostile environments. And they still didn't know, not until much later, that I was one of those assets. To them, I was boring, predictable, annoyingly responsible. But my real life, my actual work, that was something they could never imagine. Well, they dismissed me as a timid clerk. I was sitting in skiff-secure rooms with no windows, no signals, no sound except the hum of filtered air and the quiet rhythm of my own breathing. Places where information was currency and every detail carried weight. I wasn't monitoring spreadsheets. I was analyzing chatter across encrypted networks, mapping digital fingerprints, identifying patterns that pointed to threats the public never heard about. I remember one briefing vividly, the one that happened 3 days before the barbecue where my step-family celebrated Mark's promotion like it was a Nobel Prize. I stood before Director Evans, a man who could silence a room by simply entering it. His expression rarely moved, but his mind never stopped. He trusted very few people, but he trusted me. "The asset indicates a spike in communication traffic," I said, gesturing toward a cluster of nodes on the digital map. "The pattern matches pre-operational surveillance from the last 3 documented incidents." I took a breath. "The probability of an imminent threat has reached 92% within the next 48 hours. I recommend elevating to Delta posture." There was no tremor in my voice, no hesitance. It was all calculation. Evans didn't congratulate me. He didn't pat me on the head. He didn't say, "That's nice, sweetie." He just nodded one sharp, deliberate, final. "Execute," he said. "Your analysis has never been wrong." That was my world, a place where my mind mattered. And then I'd go home for holidays and be reduced to the invisible girl, the one they only acknowledged when they needed something done or when Mark wanted someone to blame. I lived 2 lives. One built on responsibility and quiet precision, and another constructed from indifference and dismissal. And I kept those worlds separate as long as I could. Until the night they broke their own illusion. I woke up in a hospital bed, shoulders stitched, head heavy, body aching. The antiseptic smell clung to the air, mixing with something else, my mother's fake concern. She sat beside me, face arranged into soft worry. My stepfather hovered behind her, his expression somewhere between inconvenience and performance. "Oh, sweetheart," my mother breathed, touching my hand lightly. "Thank goodness you're awake. You gave us such a scare. Scare, not guilt, not shock, not remorse. You must have tripped on the toolbox," she continued. "Mark feels awful about it. Truly awful." I didn't even respond. I just stared at her, replaying the moment the screwdriver pierced my skin, remembering the way she laughed from the other room. And something in me shifted. It didn't hurt. It didn't ache. It settled into nothingness, clarity sharper than any pain. They weren't going to admit anything. They weren't going to take responsibility. They weren't capable of seeing me, not even now, not even after I'd bled on their kitchen floor. So I nodded, silent, expression blank. I let them think I believed them. 'Twas the last time I ever let them talk over the truth. The moment they left the room, promising to clear everything up at home, the door clicked shut behind them. And I got to work. Because the duress protocol had done more than notify my handler, it had initiated a chain reaction. Reports were filed, statements were required, an internal inquiry began. When federal channels start asking questions, local responders follow. When local responders start digging, judges get involved. My family didn't understand any of that. They didn't even know which agencies existed, let alone how information flowed between them. They had no idea their actions had triggered a federal-level review. But I did, and I didn't stop it. I didn't intervene. I let the truth unfold in the only language they could no longer ignore. Which brings us full circle to the courtroom that seemed to hold its breath as the judge flipped through the report. Mark's confidence evaporated. My mother wrung her hands. Her mascara smudged at the corners from worry, maybe frustration that their perfect narrative had been interrupted. My stepfather sat rigid, jaw clenched, eyes darting between us like this was a misunderstanding he could smooth over with a charismatic apology. But the judge didn't look at them. He looked at me. "Ms. Cole," he said, voice sober, "do you wish to make a statement?" I stood slowly. My shoulder throbbed, but I ignored it. I wasn't trembling. I wasn't scared. I was ... steady. For the first time in years, I felt fully present in my own body. My eyes met his. "Yes, Your Honor." The room quieted as if gravity shifted. I could have told them everything, the years of dismissal, the condescension, the emotional bruises. But that wasn't my language anymore. It wasn't the language of federal rooms or risk assessments or cold hard facts. So I told the truth, concise, measured, unshakable. "My stepbrother assaulted me that night," I said, unprovoked. I attempted to de-escalate. Instead, he escalated. I sent a duress signal because I believed my safety was compromised. The response that followed was automatic protocol, not dramatization. I paused. I did not trip. I was harmed. Mark swallowed hard. My mother shook her head faintly, whispering no under her breath, as if she could will the story back into the one she created. But I kept going. "For years," I said, "my family has refused to acknowledge what I do, who I am, or the risks my job carries. They dismissed my work, my boundaries, and eventually my physical safety. But I'm done being invisible." The judge listened carefully. No interruption, no skepticism. When I finished, the silence returned heavy, unbroken. Then he closed the folder. And what he said next felt like the final undoing of the world they had built around themselves. "Mr. Jensen," he said, "you knowingly caused bodily harm. You attempted to mislead the court, and you targeted someone whose responsibilities involved protecting national security." My stepbrother paled. "This court does not take such actions lightly." I looked up only once toward my mother. Her expression was frozen, not in fear for me, but in disbelief that the system she thought I had fabricated was real, tangible, and powerful. She suddenly understood that all the years she spent belittling my work had been years she spent underestimating someone deeply connected to systems she could never influence. And for the first time in my life, she was speechless. The sentencing proceeded, details, consequences, conditions. My stepfamily argued, pleaded, protested. Their world collapsed under the weight of something they had never believed existed. Accountability. When it was over, I walked out of the courtroom alone, but I didn't feel alone. I felt free. There was no triumphant music, no applause, no dramatic confrontation. It's just the quiet realization that sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply the truth laid bare. I stepped into the sunlight, the air crisp and bright on my skin. The future stretched ahead, certain, yes, but finally mine, because I was no longer the quiet girl in the background, no longer the invisible daughter, no longer the one who dimmed herself to fit into a family that never wanted to see her. I was exactly who I had always been, a woman who dealt in consequences, a woman who survived, a woman they underestimated one time too many, and this time, reports spoke louder than any of them ever had. Video description SEO boosted and viral optimized when a quiet family argument turned into a nightmare at 2 a.m. I thought the worst part was the pain. I was wrong. What truly shattered me was the laughter coming from the living room, my own parents chuckling as I bled on the kitchen floor. They thought it was drama. They thought I was exaggerating. They had no idea my stepbrother had crossed a line that would change everything. But the moment I activated a secret protocol, something they never knew existed, the truth they buried for years finally exploded in court. And when the judge opened the official report, the entire courtroom froze. My family's lies, excuses, and laughter evaporated in seconds. If you love twisted family drama, underdog revenge, courtroom shockers, and true emotional storytelling, this is the narrative you won't forget.